beef, it's a bit more straightforward than chickens. You don't have as many different like departments, you can say, but it is a bit confusing still. So first, you have two main categories. One is the grain finished beef, and one is the legitimate grass finished beef. And I'm saying legitimate because it actually is tough to find legitimate grass finished beef. But I will give people resources, at least that they can find in the US, and they can use those as a blueprint if they're living in the UK. So 98% of cattle in the US are grown on quote unquote factory farms. So ironically though, 80% of cattle's life, no matter the operation, is spent on pasture, right? So they spend pretty much all of their life on pasture, but then the last 20% or so, they're sent to a feedlot. So this is typically what people see in documentaries, like cattle shoulder to shoulder in a huge open space and caged in some kind of cage or something of that sort. And obviously, remember, when the animal can't go to the food, you have to bring the food to the animal. What's the cheapest food that gets them to grow the fastest? Grains, right? And it's subsidized by the government too. 80% of the cost of an operation are grains, and the cattle are fed these grains. And then you can fatten them up quite a bit. But once again, it's not their species-specific diet. That's very important. The animal has to be given a species-specific diet if you, A, want them to be healthy, B, want their nutritional profile to be optimized and maximized, okay? So when they're fed grains, once again, it's a lot of the same issues. The omega-3 to omega-6 ratio loses its balance. So like on 5-bar beef, the meat analysis, we had a ratio of 1-to-1, 1 omega-3 to 1 omega-6, which is its natural species-specific ratio, somewhere close to that. In a lot of these factory farmed operations, you're getting like 1-to-15, 1-to-20 omega-6s, okay? Of course, you know, there are other big culprits like seed oils and processed food typically has really high omega-6s. I would first start with getting rid of a lot of those to decrease your omega-6 quantity if that's a concern. But from a beef perspective, our conversation here, that would be another source of omega-6s in terms of the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. So you might have an issue with the amyloid buildups as well, we talked about before. Obviously, a lot of cattle are given a lot of synthetic hormones too, usually as an estrogen pellet in their ear, antibiotics, beta agonists sometimes as well. So you got to take that into consideration. A lot of the beef, at least in the US, it could also say product of the USA. But what does that even mean? It means it's just processed in the USA. So I can get beef from like Brazil, JBS, import the carcasses in the US, you know, process them up in the factory, put them in packages, and it's still legally product of the USA. So it's tricky, you know? You're like, oh, in a customer's mind, if it says product of the UK, you think grown, manufactured, processed in the UK. You know, that's obvious. And it is actually the case with other meat products. So if it's like chicken, if it says that, then it is actually a product of the USA. So just to give you the idea of how confusing it's gotten, with grass-fed operations, legitimate grass-fed operations, so grass-fed, grass-finished, 100% grass-fed, I would like to look for the American Grass-Fed Association certified logo, or you just know the rancher personally. That's always a good option too. And there, they are on pasture pretty much throughout all of their life, and they're fed a species-specific diet, a herbivore diet. They're foraging on a lot of just grasses, and the larger the variety of the grass on the pasture too, or the forage, the greater the nutritional profile. The smaller the variety of the grass, the lesser the nutritional profile of the cattle. So when you want to maximize it, in fact, that's the study I teamed up with Jason Runtry at Michigan State University to do. So we're going to be looking at various grazing practices and biodynamic farming practices and how they impact the nutritional profile of the beef and in various markers there. So we just kind of met about a week ago or so, and I walked over through their facility, and we're still kind of drawing up blueprints of how to do that. But that's our emphasis, to learn how to develop like a rough copy and paste model of how to optimize the nutritional profile of the beef for health consumption of the U.S. citizen, but also how to replenish the earth at the same time, which you could do with, once again, these biodynamic farming practices where you have a combination of animals and farming, which once again, vegetarians are like super against. But that's the only way to really naturally replenish the soil without having all these crazy external inputs, which then make it more expensive to operate and rely more on industries that typically aren't sustainable or good for the environment. So for the listeners, just go to americangrassfed.org. I think that's a great website, and you'll be able to have a good rundown of what to look for and what a legitimate grass-fed operation looks like. Because at least in the US, the labeling laws are kind of tricky. So like I can sell my grass-fed beef as grass-fed, grass-finished, but here's where the trick is. I can feed them grass for like 8 months, put them on grains for like 2 months, finish them on grass for like a week, and still sell it as grass-fed and grass-finished, you see? And I'm kind of not lying to you. Also, there's just very little oversight. It's mostly kind of like paperwork. So you want to be a grass-fed supplier, you just submit some paperwork. No one checks on your operation. And okay, you're a grass-fed supplier. But if it's an AGA certified ranch, they will actually go and inspect it on site once every 15 months. And the reason they do it once every 15 months is to see the operation every single season. Because sometimes in certain seasons you could be a legitimate grass-fed operation, but in other seasons you can't. And they want to make sure you could actually do it every single season.